Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. You can get that wherever you listen to your podcast, and it's brought to you by PropSwap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bet, take your profit, find out how. PropSwap.com. Download the PropSwap app today. Adam Caplan from InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast is here. We got a ton of NFL news to go over into this weekend where the NFL is getting ready for free agency to begin. This is the final week with really no football. The new league year begins next week. So let's bring Adam Caplan in and discuss all the happenings around the National Football League. Adam, what's going on, man?
Michael, Gil, I'm so glad to be with you. And by the way, every time I hear that song, my little intro, I can't believe it'll be 16 years this summer coming up that the NWO was formed. In WCW, man. This brings me back to, and by the way, do you remember, I don't know if you watched that pay-per-view live, I did with my nephews, and we all got it wrong. We never guessed Hulk Hogan. Can you believe that? We all got it wrong.
Right. Well, some people thought it was going to be Sting, but I guess Hulk Hogan at the last minute made the decision that he would make the heel turn. And the rest, they say, is history. Speaking of a guy who could be a WWE wrestler, one would be Jason Kelce. I think he would probably be have a great role in AEW or WWE. But he made his decision yesterday on the 2022 season. So what is the future for Kelce this season?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Mike. So here's the real story we're told. So the Eagles and the agent met at the Combine last week. They exchanged proposals, and they had an idea of where they needed to go. I have to give the Eagles credit. The deal that Kelce got, which I learned this morning is really strong fact, is a little bit more than I thought he'd get. It's $14 million plus $500,000 in incentives. And now here's the thing: it wasn't as though he wasn't under contract. He was under contract, but both sides knew there was language which we reported last year at the time that both sides would have to go back to the bargaining table, so to speak, if he wanted to come back. That was that poison pill of $30 million. It was a roster bonus on June 3rd. Both sides they knew that he would never be able to play for that. So we're also told it's got a similar structure like last year. So good for the Eagles to step it up, and good for Jason to get the money. It's really remarkable. This guy at 34 years old to be an All-Pro is simply like unheard of at the center position. And it's not like it's like by popularity. He actually played at an elite level. And let's not forget, though, the Eagles tried to trade him 6 years ago. In my reporting on that 6 years ago, they didn't even try to deny it, which is kind of funny. Usually they try to shoot me down with stuff like that. But I honestly, 6 years later, I would not have ever believed he would be playing. I certainly found it hard to believe, but it's a tribute to him, his toughness, and what an absolute leader he is. It's really one of the more remarkable stories during Howie Roseman's career, and a true Eagle who probably will wind up working for the team someday in some capacity. I believe. No, it's nothing. There's nothing going on with that now. But knowing how much he loves the organization and they love him, I could absolutely see him working for them when he retires.
All right, so Kelce's back, which means he'll be at center. And I guess the next question would be, what happens at left guard? You got Sayamala back. You got Dickerson back. Do they battle it out? Does one guy go to the right side? They seem to like Driscoll. That seems to be an interesting storyline now that we know that Kelce is back.
It's funny you bring that up because we just talked about that on our show this week. And that to me is certainly a good problem to have. Just knowing the Eagles as we do, I remember checking into the Andre Dillard situation at the trade deadline. Teams told us flat out the Eagles were not really aggressive trying to move him because they really value depth. So if you believe that, and I do, they don't have to move Sayamalo, but the problem is $5 million is too much for a starter, for a backup. I could see $2 or $3 million. It's just too much. So they're not saying he's available, but you just mentioned Driscoll, who they love, particularly the O-line coach Stoutland, and he's been a revelation. But the problem is he's been hurt. When he plays, he's great. I mean, he's been a great story, but he's been hurt. Sayamalo's had injuries, Mike. They've had a bunch of injuries, as you know, in the interior. So that becomes a problem. And again, they really value this. So knowing that, I don't believe they'll be active to do it, but it's a good problem to have, and they'll space that out as they get closer to the draft. Now, even with all that depth, don't be surprised if by a shock that they keep all 3 first-round picks. Don't be surprised if they draft a lineman with one of them. They probably won't, but I would not rule that out.
I was going to say, with Kelce coming back, and now that they know that they, don't need to replace Tulane, because really Brooks retired, and then Kelce, if he would have left, does that affect their draft mindset? You're saying no.
No, I think, again, just knowing the way the Eagles operate, they don't want to be boxed into a corner. When they've screwed up in the draft, it's because they didn't have plan B. They've got plan A, plan B, and plan C. Remember when they drafted Marcus Smith, who wound up being a real reach? They did not, the board did not go the way that they wanted when they were picking the mid-20s. There were 3 players they wanted, all went before them, and the trade they had worked out didn't work out. They were unable to trade out, and they took Smith, who was a reach. He should have been drafted later. So I just believe where they are, they're in a great position to trade up or trade down, and that's a good spot to have. It's that Carson Wentz trade turned out to be a little bit better than we all expected. Let's admit that.
We'll get to the Wentz trade from this day, too, in just a little bit. But let's go to what's going on with Fletcher Cox. We know last year teams called. They didn't move him, but it seems that his name is starting to come up a little bit today.
Yeah, here's what happened with trade deadline. It was cap prohibitive. It just would have been extremely difficult to trade him due to the cap issue, to the immediate dead money would be on the cap. This year, it's more palatable. They could use what's called a post-June 1 designation. You get 2 of them. And you have to hold the cap hit until after June 1. On June 2nd, then you half it, which means this year's cap would go on here, and the rest of the dead money would go on next year's cap. And the Eagles are going to be in great cap position because here's what happened. We probably need to talk about this a little bit more. Because, Mike, they extended just about everyone other than maybe Javon Hargrave. It would surprise me if they extended Miles Sanders because they don't really need to because he's had an injury history. But other than Hargrave, and he still has, he's on the last year of his deal. He was terrific last season. They've gotten every young player extended, so they don't really need to do anything. So they're in great cap position, Mike. They're in a good spot here with the cap, not only for this year. They're in good spot for. I actually started looking at future caps for the Eagles. They're in really good shape. And the Eagles planned this because they knew the cap was going to go up way. As long as they don't have another COVID issue, the cap's going to rise really big next year. And they're just in a good spot. They're pretty much in position to do, Mike, starting next week, do whatever they need to do.
All right, well, let's look at that then. Free agency opens next week. Let's take a look at their plans. Adam, how is Howie Roseman going to approach free agency? Yeah,
now, let me just preface this because people like to say that I'm wrong on stuff, but they don't quote me right sometimes. They're going to be aggressive. I'm not saying they're going to sign 10 players. 1 year I said they're going to sign 6 players. They signed 4. Well, the 2 players they didn't sign, they tried to. It didn't work out because they put a number on the player. Here's one misnomer, and I learned this the hard way, covering this business for 19 years. Just because you have a lot of cap space does not mean you need to overspend. They're going to spend with what they put on the particular player. Like we know that they're going to be on some free agent safeties, whether it's Marcus Williams or another safety. It doesn't mean they're going to sign them. It's just a matter of whatever number they put on them. They put a number on Malcolm Jenkins in 2014. Same with Rodney McLeod in 2016, and they got those both right. If it goes over what they think the player's worth, they won't do it. That's where the difference between the Howie Roseman in 2011, Mike, when they overspent, made so many mistakes. They're way smarter about understanding what the value of a player is.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people are anticipating wide receiver as an area. Is that a spot too that we should keep our eyes on because there's a lot of depth there?
Yeah, our understanding is we reported first on Inside the Birds earlier this week. We'd heard they have interest in Juju Smith-Schuster. Again, it doesn't mean they're going to sign him. What we're told is he's looking for $8 to $10 million on a short 1 or 2 year deal. He's relatively young, good possession receiver who could line up on the outside. We had Greg Cosell on from NFL Films who does his tape series for us. Greg said he absolutely could play on the outside. You could see those film breakdowns if you go to our YouTube page. Or obviously our pod platform, on any pod platform. Greg made it pretty clear that the guy's shown he can do it. Unfortunately, he had a serious shoulder injury. He did come back in the last week. Give him credit. He was not supposed to come back, but toughed it out. And pretty high-character guy, does things the right way. And he would be a good signing. And, look, they're clearly looking for a receiver. I think everybody knows that.
Yeah, because they were reported to have been interested in Calvin Ridley before he got himself into some trouble. So does that give us a little insight and a little preview of the fact that they might look at that position in free agency?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, it was a report by Jay Glazer. I know Jay real well. When he says something, particularly about the Eagles, it's true. That tells you Calvin Ridley before. Now, again, the reason why it didn't happen is because the Falcons, to their credit, knew that Ridley was being investigated at the time, and they could not go through with it. Of course, they couldn't tell the Eagles why. They just said, "Hey, we're going to hold off." And the reason is obviously because of the gambling concern. Now, here's the thing, though, which is interesting. My understanding of the situation is the Eagles did their homework. I don't know if they talked to the agent. I don't know if they got permission to. I don't know how they got the information. But they knew whatever Ridley was dealing with off the field last year, which he took a personal leave of absence, either it's straightened out or they felt comfortable with the situation. That's why they were going to go through with the trade until, of course, the gambling situation which came about, which the league suspended him for a season. But think about it. Ridley is a former first-round pick, a very gifted player, a top 20 wide receiver, Mike, in this league. That tells you the Eagles are looking to do something potentially fairly significant. Juju Smith-Schuster, I wouldn't call it significant, but it tells you they've already given the answers to the test. They're going to do something, receiver, obviously.
Yeah, I agree. And do you think a lot of people commenting on the year, was that too severe? Did they have to send a message?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, so you can't. I know look, it's inherent conflict of interest. You can't gamble on football if you're in the league play. The rules are what they are. But I see the stuff on social media. But hey, this guy, actually, Darius Slay. What Darius Slay said was very fair. Guys hitting girlfriends and women, they get 6 games, and this guy didn't hurt anybody. No, he hurt integrity of the game. I thought he should have got 6 to 8 games. Yeah. I mean, Josh Shaw. I remember when this former Bengals DB, who was a sort of a journeyman, he got over a year. Because he got suspended during the season, whereas Ridley's getting suspended out of season. I don't have a problem with you saying, if someone says it should only be 6 or 8 games, I got it. I honestly, the integrity of the game issues, I know Roger Goodell a little bit. He's real big on the integrity of the game stuff. That's why he crushed the Patriots like he did, the Saints like he did. Where you think you think the penalties are too severe, he looks at it differently. He's so much about protecting the shield. That's why they came down on a year on Ridley.
Adam Caplan, InsideTheBirds.com, from the Inside the Birds podcast as well. All right, quarterbacks, they moved all over. One stayed, but 3, 2 on the move, another one in the news, another one who had some, I don't want to say clarity today, but at least he was in the news today. Let's start with the first one. Aaron Rodgers, he's decided Green Bay's the place for me. Now, he's far and away the best quarterback in the NFC. So, Rodgers stays in Green Bay. Were you surprised?
No, I've been saying that in every interview I've done for the last month. Every indication, privately and publicly, was that he was coming back. He was not willing to say he was coming back until the contract was right. He hasn't signed it yet, but it's a mere formality. He's already agreed to the deal. It's a restructured deal, but he's going to make a hell of a lot more money, and they're going to be able to lower his cap number for the season to help. That's why Devontae Adams is coming back on the franchise tag, and the Packers still have interest in re-signing him to a new deal. But look, they want to run it back. And they're going to. And the reason why, Mike, that I thought Rodgers would want to come back is he was so bad in the playoff game against the Niners. I could not see him leaving, just playing like that. It's just not, he's a super type A personality is what Packers called him. He's incredibly competitive, and he was just not going to walk away. No way.
All right. Then he stays, and then an hour later, Russell Wilson, who we heard so much about. He wasn't going to be traded. He didn't want to go to the East Coast. He ends up in Denver. This one here, kind of break this one down. And some people said, well, they didn't even want Rodgers. It was always about Wilson. But was it really?
No, they wanted Rodgers. They knew he was never available. Every team knew that David Dunn, his agent, was negotiating, and Rodgers wanted to stay. That was the vibe they were getting, the intel they were getting, so they didn't do that. By the way, the Broncos would have traded for Rodgers last summer if they could. He was not on the market. Packers never made him available. So, so with Russell Wilson, it's fascinating. So here's the real story. Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson have never, ever seen eye to eye, even remotely, on the structure of the offense. In my reporting on this, going back a year and a half, it goes back to the fall of 2020. Members of the front office, members of his coaching staff went to Pete Carroll and said, listen, the phrase let Russ cook, let him come out throwing the football. Analytically, the numbers will match up. The more you throw in the first half, the better you are. The numbers are irrefutable going back to the 60s. And Pete gave in. Pete Carroll gave in the first half of every game, almost in the first half of that season. Russell Wilson was on pace to set an NFL record. He had 28 passing touchdowns through 8 games. Pete Carroll told Brian Schottenheimer, enough, we need to run the football more. And teams played him differently, and Russell Wilson struggled mightily, and Brian Schottenheimer lost his job after that season, despite doing a great job. And Pete Carroll won the battle. And you know what, though? The Seahawks didn't get 3 first-round picks. Why? Because Russell Wilson would only go really to the Broncos. There were other teams interested, but he wanted to go somewhere where there was an offensive head coach, and the head coach will call the plays, and Nathaniel Hackett. And they're going to let Russ cook there. He's not going to throw it 40 times a game, but it'll be way more than he did per game for the Seahawks last season.
He's got some good, interesting weapons there. All right, quarterback number 3, Carson Wentz. What happened in this whole situation? He is now in Washington. I can't imagine he's thrilled about this, but this is where he is.
My understanding from being at the Combine last week, I know that people find this hard to believe. In fact, I was surprised by this, but what I would tell you is it was more about the owner, Jim Irsay, than Chris Ballard. I know Chris Ballard was extremely critical of Wentz. My sense is when Ballard said it wasn't a done deal, they were still working on it, is that he could not convince Jim Irsay. My understanding of the whole situation is Jim Irsay wanted Wentz off the team. People forget Jim Irsay was actually, before Bill Polian got there and before Bill Tobin was the GM, I believe Jim Irsay was the GM for a short period of time. So as an owner, he does know football more than most owners, and he felt there was a lack of leadership there. But the one way I will defend Wentz is, think about this. He breaks his foot. He has a stress fracture in August. He only misses 3 weeks. He doesn't miss 1 game. He starts all 17 games, and he has 2 bad games, particularly the last one, and they held it against him. They felt him not being able to practice. Obviously he's on the COVID list and didn't get off of it until the day of the game against Jacksonville, and obviously he was bad in that game.
Yeah. That
cost him the job. And look, Washington is desperate. Wentz is still talented, folks. I'm just telling you, he played fairly well last season. I know people like to beat him up. But Carson, Wentz has got to take responsibility for, when you're on 3 teams in 3 years, folks, it's not about them. It's maybe sometimes about you, and he's got to take a look at himself. But he is still very talented. And I'll never forget that game at Baltimore last year when he and Lamar Jackson went at it. It was one of the best games of the year. People forget that Monday night game. He was unbelievable in that game. The guy could still play, and he needs – look, he's not going to get the offensive line he had in Indy. Let's not forget about that, but that's where it is.
Real quick before we move on to our last order of business here, what was any dealings with Wentz in terms – it seems that he just – the word we were using, it seems like he's just not a relatable guy in an NFL locker room. There's guys from all walks of life. How relatable is he? Because you're right. I think Irsay decided this guy can't be a leader, that he's not. And I said maybe he's just not relatable to a locker room that has people from all walks of life in there.
Mike, my understanding is, though, he got along with his teammates fine, where he did have some issues with some of his teammates, or his teammates had some issues with him on his way out. No, in fact, I spoke to some agents who had players, some prominent players. They really liked him. And by the way, they had the lowest COVID vaccine score. They were the ranked lowest in terms of getting the vaccine. So it's not just Wentz. It was several key players didn't get the vaccine. So I know I get it. People like to beat Wentz up for everything, but I'm not trying to defend him. But it's just a fact, and that tells you that players there want to do their own thing. It's unfortunate, but when you're the quarterback, everyone's going to point the finger at you.
Deshaun Watson. What happened today? Has anything been cleared up and he gets some interest around the league. He's going to.
No.
But today, did anything get cleared up?
I need to talk to someone legally about kind of what this means, but I just know this. If the Panthers are comfortable, and just what I've known for, this time last year, let me just tell you something, Mike. If we weren't talking about the legal stuff, it would have been last year the Eagles, Panthers, and Dolphins. Mm-hmm. Dolphins basically announced that they dropped out. The Eagles have been monitoring, but it doesn't seem like they're going to do anything, barring something unforeseen. And the Panthers, now it's funny. Denver, I was told by a very good source, was always monitoring, but you know what they just did? They weren't going to wait, and here you go. So we'll see what happens over this next week. But it's really fascinating. It's a story that never ends.
Yep, he had a deposition today, by the way, for those of you wondering. He exercised the Fifth Amendment and basically
we knew it was happening.
Several hours, just basically no clarity, did not answer anything. So that's where that stands. Last order of business, Khalil Mack, Chargers, Bears. Why did the Bears give up on Mack after they gave up a lot to get him a couple of years ago?
Yeah, got him in 18, gave up a lot of competition, including a first-round pick and others. So first 2.5 years, he was terrific. He's been hurt the last 2 seasons, missed a lot of time last year. Talking to the Bears, he didn't practice enough, but here's why they moved him. First of all, the Chargers wanted him. Brandon Staley, the head coach of the Chargers, coached him as the outside linebackers coach for the Bears for 1 season. Staley changed their defense with the Chargers from a 4-3 to a 34 last season. And the Bears, as Mike, you should know, for the first time in I don't know how long, they're now a 43 under Matt Eberflus, and they don't think he fit it, but the Chargers were the aggressor here. They gave the 2 draft picks, and they want to sort of rebuild the defense with guys who fit. And, boy, the Bears are clearing out a lot of cap space, a lot. And they're kind of in a semi-rebuild here with Justin Fields as the quarterback.
There you go. A lot of news you can use as the NFL playoffs, free agency begins next week. Bodies will start moving. News will be coming fast and furious. We'll have it for you on Football at 4. Check out the guys on the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com. And, of course, next week, Football at 4 right here on the Sports Bash. Adam, have a great rest of your weekend, man.
You too, man. Thanks.
There's Adam Caplan from InsideTheBirds.com.